Hi there, my name is Dr. Kelly Clarke, and today I would like to talk about giftedness in learners. So across the span of kids that go to school, there are some kids that are in the highly elevated range of intelligence, and they often do better or can do better in school, and these are the kids I want to talk about today. There's some parents, of course, that want to have their children assessed. We're going to talk about some of the reasons why you would get assessed, why we would have our children assessed if they are high intellect, have high intelligence, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about that, maybe some of the myths as well. I'm going to talk about how we measure intelligence for these kind of populations and some of the implications for these results. So when I do assessments in schools, it's most of the kids, 68% of the population falls in the average range of intelligence. But when we get to the higher range of intelligence, and this is about the 98th percentile, so these kids they'll do stronger on intellectual batteries than most kids and at the 98th percentile. In fact, I'm a psychologist in the Edmonton area, and oftentimes these children will need to have an overall score of 132, standard score of 132, and at the 98th percentile. Sometimes I'll get kids, I'll do IQ assessments, and they'll fall in the 115, which is quite high. It's in the high range as well, high average range of intelligence. These kids would fall at, and they could be students that would enroll in the academic challenge program. So even in Edmonton Public School Board, there are programs for kids that have higher intelligence to very high intelligence, like in the gifted intelligence range. And they would call that gifted and talented, or sometimes they'll use that acronym G&T. So just to describe that a little bit, I think oftentimes we will think that kids that are in the gifted range do really well in school, that they get straight A's, they have no difficulties, they're easy to teach, these kind of things. And really that can be very far from the truth. So not only do these kids have high intelligence, but they have also other abilities. They're not just highly intelligent. Oftentimes kids within the gifted range, within that high range that I was speaking about, often have other things going that go along with high intelligence, and that can be having big emotions. They have big ideas, big emotions. You'll sometimes have the sense you're almost talking like, say, for example, I'd have a grade 4 student. They'll be speaking to you like they're grade 7 or 8. Their vocabulary is advanced. They'll seem like you're talking to a mini adult. They have the ability to articulate and express ideas way above their age and their peers. So you'll have these big ideas. But they'll also have, because they have this advanced ability to reason with language, but not the same level of maturity for that age, they will have difficulties with, justice and fairness. So they will be, some of the students or some of the kids will be, this isn't fair, and will really have big emotions about those kind of things. So sometimes going along with high intelligence are those big emotions, and they can have those kind of things going on as well. High curiosity, like I said, that strong sense of justice. Intense emotions, advanced language. So often their vocabulary, their ability to express and understand ideas well above most people. They can also have unusual sensitivities, so that, being emotionally sensitive can be some of the things that go along with them. So they're not only just highly intelligent, but there's actually a neurodevelopmental difference. Their brains seem to be a bit different. So they can be kids that are, misunderstood. They get easily bored. They can even underperform in school because that same intellectual challenge is not there, or academic challenge, and so they get quite bored in school as well. This can happen for these students. So I just wanted to let you know that part of the way we determine if somebody's intellectually advanced, often I'll get this a lot of times. Most of the parents that are out there are, loving and believe that their children have a lot of great abilities, which of course all children do have good abilities, but they may not necessarily have high intelligence. So I'll have parents coming and wondering if their student is highly intelligent. So one of the things that I wanted to speak about is, how do you know if your child is highly intelligent? So, because a lot of us will think that, yes, my kid is really intelligent. Well, you're often going to see early and precocious language development in these children. You're going to see that they speak or articulate ideas more advanced, say, than their younger peers or same age peers. So we'll see advances in things like verbal reasoning. There'll also be kids that are quite good with spatial reasoning. They might be kids that are very advanced in things like puzzles or Lego or, drawing and spatial reasoning, three-dimensional type of objects. They'll also be strong with kind of logical and deductive reasoning. So it's almost like that science brain is more advanced. You'll notice that they think, might have other children of which you can compare and go, wow, this, Susie or Sam is much stronger than, say, my other kids in these areas, and they seem to be precocious. They seem to be advanced in their intellectual abilities. They'll often have strong working memory as well. They'll have the ability to hold chunks of information and longer chunks and be able to manipulate that information back and forth. So, for example, you give them numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4, they're able to reverse that 4, 3, 2, 1. So manipulate that, which is working memory, better than most kids their age. They also can think more quickly, can work through visual information quickly. Now, that's not always the case. Often kids who are highly intelligent do think and reason at higher levels. Their verbal and their nonverbal reasoning is higher, but sometimes their memory and, their processing speed can be even average. So we can see those discrepancies, in ability for gifted learners as well. And often, as I said, they don't have to perform above academically. So this is interesting. So, I'll get some parents coming in, and because their child is doing really well in school, they'll assume that intelligence must be much higher. Now, that is not always the case, as is the opposite. So if you have a highly intelligent student or child, it doesn't mean they're going to do well academically. They could be very average. And again, back to things like boredom or attention or, these kind of things, or emotional issues going on for them. So the same goes for academically. So I'll get sometimes students who do really well. They're well above average, say, and maybe even a grade above academically. But when I do IQ testing, they're in the average range. So just because they do well academically does not necessarily mean that they're high intelligence. So those are some of the things that I want you to think about. So, the other thing is that if somebody is determined to have high intelligence, and we use things like the WISC-5, which is the Wechsler Intelligence Scales for Children, this is the 5th edition. We can also use things like the Stanford-Binet. These are things that look at, again, verbal, nonverbal reasoning, fluid reasoning, the ability to use logic, deduction, working memory, processing speed, quantitative reasoning. These kind of things are all things we look at when we're looking at, high intellectually advanced students. But just because they do well on these things, I don't want us to think like it's like a crystal ball that we'll be able to go, yes, for sure, they'll be able to do well academically. Now, they do have the capacity, but again, it does not necessarily mean that they're going to do well, because we often or can assume that because they're highly intelligent, we can put them off to the side and give them a bunch of advanced math or these kind of tasks, and they can just do it on their own. And that's usually not true. They still need guidance. They need support. They need that help from adults to help them, to learn very similar to other kids. So it is not necessarily a prediction for success. Certainly not a prediction for success emotionally or these other areas, but it can show that they do have a high proclivity towards advanced learning in school if guided and supported. So that's one of the reasons we would want to do an intellectual assessment if you suspect that your child is highly advanced intellectually, because A, they may get bored, they may need to have more challenge academically, and in addition to that, they still need guidance and support. I had one student who was clearly the student was in the 140 IQ, 132 is that cutoff range, and this student in grade 3 was really struggling with mathematics, highly superior intellect, and yet really struggling with mathematics. And so it was clear, in speaking with the parents, because of course the school is doing the best and doing a good job, student was getting very emotional, very blocked with mathematics, even though high IQ, and probably could have gone the opposite direction as far as growing academically if, with consultation with the parents, they were open to, this male needed some support. So going through the mathematics and, helping to guide some of that process, practicing the mathematics for him really boosted the self-confidence and ended up, really increasing the mathematics. And so that natural high intelligence just was able to give way. And for for grade 4 actually did really well in mathematics following that. But yeah, I just we want to, clearly understand an intellectual profile. Do they have the capacity to grow academically? And then, provide guidance and support. Also, increasing the challenge of the academic program might be a good idea. This is another area that I find quite interesting, because I think, quite a few of the times when parents find out that their kids are highly intelligent, the tendency is, well, I want to put them into a gifted program. Now, I'll just throw out my thoughts either direction, for the consideration of a gifted program. Now, yes, boredom or finding it easy might be something, of course, we want to bring up for a student who is in a regular academic program who happens to be highly intelligent. So we would at least want to talk to the teacher and say, you know what, this student is highly intelligent. We do want to have some increased challenge for them. But I would not necessarily recommend we should get them into a G&T program. Because here's the thing, when a student finds out they're highly intelligent, there's often kind of this imposter syndrome that they feel like they have to live up to this intelligence. And so that there's this performance anxiety that can result. So I would be more inclined to whether you even want to share that they're highly intelligent, that's up to the parent. But just to say that, of course, that they're smart and they're going to do well with school. But here's the downside of maybe pulling them and putting them in a gifted intelligent program, is that they're now going to be mixed with a bunch of kids that they're going to be at least as intelligent as them. And so in that social status realm, now they've gone from to maybe one of the smarter kids in a regular academic stream, finding school reasonably easy. Now they're into a class where they're common. They're like everybody else. In fact, they may find that they're on the lower side, which can affect things like self-esteem. So it's up to, parental values. Do you want to put your student your child in a program where they're kind of, common, and now their sense of their own confidence may possibly go down, in favor of being challenged more. It can do things like increase performance anxiety and, comparison to others and those kind of things. So, that's something to think about. Also, when kids, and I've talked to adults who are gifted, and then they get into university, and university it levels the playing field, so that they have this sense of, I'm gifted and talented, and as far as IQ, get into university and I'm performing like everybody else. So there's almost this kind of guilt, this dissatisfaction, this disappointment. So again, there's some reasons I think for keeping them in in a regular academic stream, talking to the teacher and providing more academic challenge. But still having, kind of that sense of I'm doing well, and that confidence, and that goes well through school. They also wouldn't have that same level of expectation moving on towards, say, university or an post-secondary educational program. Now, in favor of the G&T programs, of course, then you're going to get other students who are similar to you. So they'll feel, similar as far as that kind of emotional expression and some of those big feelings and that sense of fairness and social justice, and be able to have those conversations at an advanced level with kids with similar thinking ability. These are favorable things as well. So it comes back down to parental kind of values and what's important to you, and these kind of priorities going forward. So I wanted to mention that there are good reasons to get intellectual assessment if you think your child is gifted for reasons of, boredom and challenge. But, if you do find that they're at that level, do we want to put them in a gifted and talented program for some of the reasons that I was talking about? So, that is some of the things that I wanted to share with you. I think, moving forward, when we do find out our kids have those high intellectual features to them, it can be fun, right? Having those kind of enjoyable conversations where you're not just teaching them what to think, but you're teaching them how to think. What do you think about the environment? Getting them to explain what they value and why they think the environment's important to care for. Having those great discussions where they elaborate on their ideas, and even if they're wrong, if they get some reasons, say we're asking them, what does supernatural mean for a word, and say they get some of the features incorrect about that, we'll go, I enjoy these conversations with my kids. Well, I don't necessarily correct them, but I'll add that to the conversation. I'll say, well, that's a good piece of it. I think your understanding on that's pretty unique. And then maybe I'll add some of my conversation to what I think supernatural means. So when we have kids like that, the conversation will often be rich, and we'll have good dialogue together, sharing ideas. They're often usually interested in things, ask amazing questions. We'll want to validate those questions, the thinking behind them, not whether they get everything right or wrong, making them feel pressured, but just celebrating, enjoying their ability to think and reason. So some of those things I think are very enjoyable and reasons why we should consider getting our children assessed if we think that they have higher intelligence. And if you would like more information about gifted and talented measures, gifted and talented assessments, feel free to reach me at drkellyclarke.com, and I would look forward to that conversation. Thank you for listening today.